What's going on, guys? So, as promised, I'm going to give you my thoughts and feelings about Vagabond, The Last Exhibition, which is quote-unquote being called the last chapter of Vagabond. Now, this does not pick up where the manga left off. This is not a chapter going along with the current storyline or anything like that. This is a chapter that takes place far into the future during the final days of Miyamoto Musashi's life. This is being called the last chapter, and this is not officially released in any form. There is a lot of unfinished artwork, unfinished paneling that is going on during this chapter. It's like 130 pages. I'm sure a couple pages are going to be cut out for the final release, if this is ever actually released. And since Vagabond doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon or continuing its storyline, it's been on hiatus for years, I think we can pretty much conclude that this might be the last piece of Vagabond that we ever get. Unfortunately, the current storyline will not be complete, but this chapter does bring out a lot of things and a lot of emotions and kind of brings a lot of things full circle that Vagabond has always talked about and shown throughout its entire series. And I recently went back and reread a bunch of Vagabond in order to make my Vagabond review video. If you haven't seen that, check that out in the description below. I kept that mostly spoiler free, but this one, I'm going to delve into a lot of spoilers. So if you have not read Vagabond at all and you care about spoilers, you might want to avoid this video because I'm going to be talking about a couple of things in detail that really kind of stood out to me about this last chapter. Again, you can find this online if you search for it. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It'll be one of the first results. Like I said, it's not been officially released, but it is obviously done by Inoue himself, and I'm sure this is fan translated in some way. So some of the translations may not be 100% accurate, but mostly this is sort of visual storytelling to begin with. There's not a ton of dialogue, so I think we can pretty much get the gist of everything that's been happening here. The first thing that we see is a swordsman, a pupil, kind of searching out Miyamoto Musashi and finds him as an old man, where there's this glorious painting of him as an older man. I'm not sure how old Musashi actually lived to be in real life, but I'm sure it's like nothing compared to the life expectancy that we have now. But it is sort of a shocking thing to see him with this old man face. And considering where he was in the manga where we last left off, where he's been this kind of farming arc, and we have yet to see the final confrontation between him and Kojiro, but he pretty much laid down the sword for the most part. But that doesn't mean that he still doesn't have the warrior mindset of which he built over all of these years of different battles and experiences and travels along the way. And I think the interesting thing that we see here is there is actually a lot of regret with Musashi. And you want to think that these characters, like, we know that Musashi was a real person and everything, but a lot of the times when characters are kind of on their final days, you know, we like to think that they felt this kind of well-rounded experience of what their life was and what it meant. But Musashi still has regrets here. He has regrets about not training Jotaro the full way that he wanted to, and he knows that his time is near. He's not doing as well. And he has these memories of Inchin, who kind of comes by again as an old man. And he has these memories sort of flashing within his mind. And everything about this young swordsman is also reminding him of other things that he went through and how this sort of cycle repeats. And when you start getting to this older age, or even younger, really, a lot of times, and especially with men too, I'm not saying women don't feel this as well, but I feel like it happens a lot of time with men, is we start thinking about the legacy that we're going to leave behind. As in, what did our life amount to, and is it going to make our future generations better? Is it going to make our children better because that we were around? Were we able to share the right lessons to them? And what will happen to your name once you die? And here in one of the images, we see 5 scrolls, obviously referencing the Book of Five Rings that the actual Miyamoto Musashi wrote, which I did read fairly recently, and I think it's an incredible book. It's very specific when it comes to like swordsmanship, but one thing that I noticed while reading the book is there are many times where Musashi says things like, this is something you have to research, or this is something you have to think heavily on, but doesn't exactly describe it himself in the book. And I think the point of that is that experience is better than learned knowledge in many ways. There are things that he can teach you, things that he wrote down that are important, but for the most part, people have to live their own lives and experience their own journeys. And I think a lot of the things about the Book of Five Rings that people appreciate is that he leaves enough stuff vague, because there are certain things that are very hard to express in words. And I know that I myself find a lot of times I have a hard time picking out the right words. It's funny, like just making a video, the difference between talking off the cuff and the difference between writing something. Writing something, I can usually find the right words because I can keep going back and fixing it. But when I'm talking off the cuff, there are so many times where I'm feeling an emotion or I'm feeling something that I want to be able to express, but I can't get it out into words. And a lot of that also is because it's different for every person. So the things that I'm feeling aren't necessarily going to be the things that you're feeling. Anyways, the point of all this, what I'm saying is that He's passing down particular lessons and cutting out the BS. Instead of trying to explain things about the specifics of what he felt and experienced, he's telling you the literal things to do, as in move this way, swing your sword this way, but he's leaving out all the details for you to discover for yourself, but telling you, yes, there's a lot more details here that are very important, but they're for you to figure out on your own, because your experience is going to be different than mine. Also, when you're talking about legacy, it's not really something you can understand and fulfill for yourself. It's something that has to kind of stand the test of time to see how people respond to the things that you did after your death. And this is a kind of a difficult concept because you're going to have that constant uncertainty of, did your life matter? Did the lessons that you learned, were you able to, portray them in a meaningful way and everything? And it's so crazy because I doubt the real Musashi would think that, hundreds and hundreds of years later, that people would still be reading his books and reading his lessons and talking about his philosophies and the stuff that he learned. And that's something that there's no way that you would be able to know within your own life. So the legacy, the legend of what the name implies, it lasts over decades. And that's something that you can't understand, because your life's going to be over before you realize the full impact of your legacy. And so for a man to be able to die peacefully, he has to give up this sort of possession of, will my name be something great? Or will my name, taunt me forever? It's like you are not in charge of that. You're not the deciding factor in that. What is going to decide that is the actual physicality of what you left behind. What is there for people to see that you've done, to understand that you've done. It's not you, it's what you pass along. And there's some great imagery here. Again, these images aren't particularly finished and the scans aren't the best, but they kind of show Musashi holding this orb of energy in his arms. And I think it's sort of supposed to represent passing down, the stories that he told. And it kind of cuts to other characters that he's seen along the entire series of Vagabond, where it's like the bandit character, the brother character, I can't remember his name, but he's sort of writing something as Musashi is looking at it, and he remembers back to his death and the peace that he felt upon his death, and other characters and whatnot. And I feel like this is meant to represent, and I could be wrong, but I feel like it's meant to represent that he's sort of channeling what he learned from each person into his writings, into the scrolls. So it's like he's passing down his lessons, but even his lessons were something that he learned from other people. So this orb of knowledge that he has, I feel like is sort of a representation of the accumulative knowledge he got from every single battle, every single encounter, and every single, piece of his journey. And as he talks to these characters, they're saying it's good to see you again. We've learned from you. You learned from us. And it has a plain text image that says in the past, in the future, and for eternity. And then there's a page turn where we see a bunch of Japanese people and it says, you have shown the way. And I think that's sort of like leading to the idea that his legacy will live on. So even in his final days, in his final moments, he sees this sort of vision of how his words sort of led the way for other people. And then there's other flashes. There's of him and Otsu, there's of his father, and again, just all these different characters that sort of have interacted with his life during his life story of what we see in Vagabond at the very least. And it kind of ends with it going full circle, back to his childhood. I believe he's being cradled by his mother here. And then there's an image of the beach and water, which is very significant in like Japanese culture and whatnot, and saying, are you ready? Basically saying we're looking back on what happened, we're looking into the future of what will happen, you're in the present now, it's all connected, past, present, future, and it's time to pass on to the next world. It's like, are you willing to do that? And it's like, it's your time. And so I believe we're basically seeing the death of Musashi here, which is kind of hard to experience, but at the same time it's done in a beautiful way, and it's done in a very peaceful way. And in all reality, this is kind of how you want your death to be. You want to be able to lay peacefully somewhere, not in a ton of pain, or perhaps off in your mind so far that you don't feel any physical pain, and you kind of see the things that matter to you the most, and you see that even with you dying and stuff, you do leave a legacy that's going to matter and be important to people along the way. So I think the tragedy of Vagabond is not having the connecting pieces between continuing the story where we left off and this final chapter. But if this final chapter does exist, and if it ever gets published physically, an official release or anything, it's definitely something worth having, because it really does reflect on the entire series that Inoue wrote, but also just this lingering, lasting idea of legacy that people want to leave behind. Anyways, what did you guys think of the last chapter of Vagabond? If you've read it, search it up if you haven't seen it or you haven't read it so far. Let me know what your thoughts are about all the symbolism and everything that's happening in this chapter, and what you feel about seeing Old Man Musashi. Put all that in the comments below. As always, guys, I really appreciate you checking out these videos and giving me a chance. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and comment below, because more interaction with the video helps it be seen in the algorithm. Other than that, guys, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next time.